just, sorry, I should have mentioned that. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I comment on that, Aideen?
Absolutely, yeah. Who's that? Damien, how are you?
Damien, I'm from cyclist.ie. We're the Irish Cycling Advocacy Network. We're trying to make everyday cycling normal and safe.
Great.
As a small NGO, I can absolutely see the logic in it. We're absolutely stretched trying to fight fire, trying to change policy, trying to get ready for elections, and often capturing that data, it's just slightly further down the priority list than meeting the big crazy deadline for a submission.
Yeah.
Or so forth. So it's not that we don't value doing that counting, it's just getting the time.
Yeah. No, and I think some of it is about weaving it into the everyday work. So it's not an extra task that on a Friday evening you have to go, oh, somebody didn't fill in the Excel spreadsheet of how many people attended the whatever.
Yeah.
But that it's somehow woven into the day's work. Or if you're running an event, that it's not a separate evaluation sheet for every event that has to be separately noted. And, it's really about making it seamless and woven into the day-to-day work rather than being an additional task. But I know what you're talking about. It is, if it's seen as, and if it's something that has to be done on a Friday before you leave, that's just not going to happen, because there are other more urgent things. The other thing that is, oh, sorry. So were you able to see, sorry, I beg your pardon, you weren't able to see the poll results, were you not? I beg your pardon.
Sorry, Aideen. Yeah, basically we were sharing the results. I thought that because you were having a conversation with the awardees, then it was time to just stop sharing the results.
Okay.
But if you want, we can just continue sharing them.
All right, okay. I beg your pardon. The other thing, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is that, all of these things are proportionate. So, what one organization might do is not realistic for other organizations. So it does have to be proportionate, but it's the approach of thinking about it in a way that is led by the benefits that we deliver, is what we're really going to be talking about today. So we certainly don't want to come down heavy with saying everybody has to do this enormous constant counting of everything and surveying everybody constantly. It does have to be proportionate to what your organization is doing. So we will come to that in a minute. I'm going to switch back to the slides here. That's okay. And just get into the weeds a little bit on evaluation. Now, some of you may be familiar with this. There's what we call a logic model. And the logic model says that you put things in, you do things with them, you do things with people, and out the other end comes some form of a result. And we all assume that when we do that, those are good results that come out the other end. But to really look at that, you have to say, well, what problem are we setting out to solve, first of all? And then what inputs are we going to use? What ingredients are we going to use? What are we going to do with those ingredients? What outputs are we going to achieve? Outcomes are different, and we're going to go into that in a moment. And ultimately, we want to have societal level impact. But all the bit in the middle can get a bit vague and tricky. And that's where we want to really clarify that middle bit today. So if you think about it as inputs are the ingredients. So what do you put in? If you make a cake with, 2 eggs and 2 ounces of butter and 2 ounces of sugar, you get a very different cake than if you used 200 eggs and 200 ounces of sugar. So again, it's about being proportionate. The impact we can expect to have is somewhat related to the inputs that we put in at the beginning. So if we have a small resource going in, we can be very ambitious for our impact, and we should be, but it has to be proportionate to the amount of ingredients going in. And then you take those ingredients and you do stuff with them, you mix them and you shake them and you heat them and you cool them, and you get an output. So the output is the cake, but we didn't really do this for the cake. We did it for the outcome. What changes for me as a result of all these things that everybody did? And how do I feel about it? And how has it impacted my life? That's the outcome. And then again, we don't even do it just for the outcome at individuals level. We do it for the impact. We do it for the impact on society. Why did our parents give us birthday parties? You know, why do any of us do anything? It's for that greater good, that bigger societal impact, the bigger societal change. So we're going to go into each of these in a bit of detail here. So first of all, what is the problem? What are we setting out to solve? And everybody knows this. Everybody knows their own problem that they set out to solve. And I'm sure in the process of this, you've articulated that. But how is it a challenge to that audience exactly? Now, we're going to use a case study today of an organization called MMH, which is Maternal Mental Health. And it's referenced in Rethink Ireland's work. And it's sort of a good project that we can talk about rather than picking any one person's project. So MMH, we'll be talking about it in detail, so I should tell you a little bit about it. So it's a small social enterprise. It offers peer-led, very key words, peer-led, not psychiatrist, psychologist-led, peer-led maternal mental health support services in a rural location. So there are 5 part-time staff and 20 volunteers, and this kind of thing might resonate with a lot of you guys. It's not huge. It doesn't have hundreds of employees. It doesn't have a research officer. It's a small social enterprise. So after talking to new mums, they decided to focus on peer-led support activities for mums experiencing mental health problems. So they're very specific about what they do, who they do it for. And they reckon that the problem they're setting out to solve is that the fear of talking openly about mental health stops women from accessing the support they need. So I'm not saying I'm going to solve all your problems, MMH, we're not saying we're going to solve all your problems, but we're saying that we're going to help overcome the fear of talking openly about it and help you access the support you need. So I don't have all the answers, but I'm an environment in which you can explore those answers. So that's the problem MMH set out to solve. Okay, the inputs into this whole process, the ingredients, if you want, is the ingredients most of us use. Money, time, staff, relationships, you all, work off those ingredients. And to greater or lesser degrees, we all spend our time worrying about these ingredients. We never have enough of the ingredients to do what we have the ambition to achieve. So a lot of these are constrained ingredients. And then we take those ingredients and we do stuff with them. We recruit people, we train people, we build an audience, we create this program. We do all these activities to make things happen. Yeah. And then we have the output. It's events or programs or initiatives. And that the output is how many people attended the event or how many people completed the whole program. How satisfied were they at the time or on the day? Those are the outputs. And a lot of us count those because they're somewhat easy to count. They're countable. You can count how many bums on seats there were, how many people came into the program, how many people came out the other end of the program. And I know some of you, it's very long. The nature of the relationship you have with your participants is very long. Calling it completing the program, your years may be engaging with people. It's not like they come to 10 workshops and then they leave and you say, thanks very much, that was great, and everybody says goodbye. But at the same time, the completion or the achievement of some end goal has to be somewhere in our minds, even if it is an ongoing relationship a lot of the time. And then we come to outcomes. So output is what I walked out the door with. Outcomes is what I develop over time. So I have new knowledge, I have new skills, I'm able to take new actions, I'm able to take charge of my life, I'm able to do things differently. I have changed behavior or changed beliefs. My attitude towards something has changed. I have confidence to go back to school if I've fallen out of the school system, or, so the outcomes are very different to the outputs. And that's where we're going to really look at today, where we're saying, what are well-defined outcomes? And we really need to think about this. And the question is, who knows best? Who knows best what the outcomes are? Anyone want to hazard a guess? It's not me. Okay, it's our beneficiaries, our audience, our participants, our clients, our service users, whatever we want to call them. They understand the outcomes better than we do. Even if, a lot of people have personal experience of the issue that they're helping to solve, we still have to put ourselves in the other people's shoes and empathize. But no matter how much of that we do, we're not really going to understand it any better than just by asking them directly. And that's where we really want to involve those stakeholders, the beneficiaries themselves. And the kind of questions we can ask them are, what changed for you? What changed for you having engaged with our organization? And then really dig into that more. How does that make you feel? Why is that important? What difference does it make? And kind of going around that a little bit to really get to the heart of it. Saying it increased my confidence, that doesn't tell me a lot. Tell me more. How does that change day to day? What difference does that make? And then did anything else change for you? Because sometimes the 4 things we think are the most important maybe aren't. Then maybe there's more to it than that. And then who else do you think experienced any change? So nobody lives in isolation. So say, for example, with our mother's mental health situation, who else experienced change? Maybe the baby experienced change, the husband or the partner or the other people who live in the household with you. So what do you think has changed for them? So really, these are tricky conversations to have, but if you have your stakeholders who have been on this journey with you, then these are things that we should be able to understand. And then, do you think there were any unintended negative consequences? We have to ask that one, because maybe we're missing something here. Maybe there's more going on that is off-putting to people, or that opened up things that they hadn't thought of and that became an issue separately. I did a program it was a transition year program, and one of the unintended negative consequences was that the boys actually found it intimidating to present, and their self-confidence took a knock in some cases when they were put up against other people and they had to present. And part of it was that they hadn't put in as much preparation. They hadn't thought it was as big a deal. And then when it actually came to it and they had to present side by side with other people, their confidence actually took a knock. So at least that was something you could act on. You could say, okay, we need to help them prepare better. And, so this is all about understanding it so that we can improve the program and we can make it more effective. Okay, so a couple of examples of how we can get to these well-defined outcomes. This is about a program that was helping adults with additional needs to become more independent. And a lot of it was very practical stuff, how to manage a bank account, how to make a dentist appointment, how to do those adulting things that maybe they were used to have. It was an opportunity for them to start to take charge over more aspects of their lives. So things like, in the initial part of the conversation, you would get answers like, oh, well, I can read my bank statement myself. So this was part of what was in the program. I can now do it. I can read my bank statement myself, full stop. And you could get to that. But when you drill down into that and say, well, how does that make you feel? Why is that important to you? You get down into things like, well, I'm more in control. I'm more independent now. I don't have to ask for help. I don't have to be the person that's always asking for help now. I can be my own person. I can contact my doctor and ask directly questions. Sorry, mix up there. Again, that's what the program set out to do. This person says that, therefore check the box, we achieved it. But really, how does that make life different for you? Well, I've a better relationship with my doctor now. I trust them better, and I'm able to manage my own health better. So now we're getting to the more outcome oriented. We're heading towards impact. We're getting to a point where we're really offering change in the person's life. And a lot of these came down to this kind of stuff, which was, I rely less on my family and our relationship is more equal now. So I'm not considered somebody who's always asking for help and needing help. I'm more of an equal participant in the household. I don't have to turn to everybody to ask for help constantly. So you start to get into much more rich, well-defined outcomes about the effectiveness and what our program has offered to people. So, just looking at the time, we'll touch briefly on impacts. So outcomes are about the individual. Impacts then are about the broader society. So, you know, changes in the sector, changes in thinking, we're fulfilling potential, we're offering progression. It's a much bigger, longer term thing, which we won't talk about as much today, because today is very much about the outcomes part of it. I want to introduce briefly, Amy, I don't know, did you want to talk about this, that Rethink Ireland have a new impact management framework that they're going to be asking awardees to look at in the future. And it's a document like this, which I'm sure you'll get to have a look at some point. Not to worry about today, but it's just something that sort of outlines this way of thinking and how this way of thinking is really changing within the sector. So that document will be available to you in the future if you would like to look at that. It was launched just last week. But what we're talking about today is sort of the 7 principles of it. And this is a shift in thinking a little bit. So it's more about involving the stakeholders. It's more about understanding what changes for those stakeholders. So what changed in your life as a result of the program is probably the most simple way to sum up this approach to impact management. And then valuing the things that matter to them. So that's where, you know, some things are more important than others, and they might not be the ones we expect. And it should be informed by the stakeholders' preference, not our preference. Then only including what's really material. I think sometimes we can get a very long list of the things we think where we affect change. And it's really about honing in on what's really, really important to the stakeholders themselves, and a little more focus on that. Don't overclaim, only claim for what we're really contributing to, being transparent and verifying the results. So those are further details, but those first 3, involving the stakeholders, understanding what changes, and valuing those things that matter to the stakeholders, and really keeping the focus on them and not what we might think is the most important. Okay, I've done enough talking. We're going to break out into breakout rooms. I want you to think a little bit more about this organization, MMH. So just to recap, it's a small social enterprise offering peer-led maternal mental health support services. It's in a rural location. It's small. I'm guessing it's around the size, quite a few of the organizations here, 5 part-time staff, 20 volunteers. And after talking to recent mums, this group decided to focus on peer-led support activities for mums experiencing maternal mental health problems. So it was set up by a couple of women who had had this difficult experience themselves and found a lot of benefit in talking to their peers, and decided in this rural location, we can't be the only ones. There must be other people like us. And how can we connect people to the services that are available, but first get over that hump of the fear of talking about it. So they sat down and they looked at it and they said, right, we have our logic model, we have time, we have money, we put in the staff, we put in the volunteers, we train, we organize these different groups, we have arts, we have creche sessions, we have therapy sessions, we have facilitated therapy sessions, we have 60 women attending, you know, so they've set up all these, and these are the outputs. But what they wanted to explore was the outcomes. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And the impact for them is that women access the support they need to become thriving individuals and parents. So they're not providing all the support, but they're creating an environment in which women can access the support, because that isolation part was where they saw this barrier and that fear. So they're not, just to be clear, they're not therapists, they're not, you know, mental health professionals. They're just providing this peer-led safe space, I suppose you'd call it. So that's what's for discussion today. And we're going to go into groups and do a role play. So this is where I stop talking and you guys do all the talking. So what we are going to do is, who best understands it? Who are we going to ask in our role play? And for that, some of you guys get to be the beneficiaries themselves. So in the role play, we'll be in groups of Fiorella, groups of 5 or 6, is it?
Sorry, we are going to have only 2 groups.
2 groups, okay.
Yeah.
And in each group, there'll be a facilitator, one or two of the staff from Rethink will be there. Yes. And we're going to, so 1 or 2 people, we're going to ask you guys to be the organization, let's say. You're going to be MMH, you're going to be the question asker. And you can use some of the questions that we have here. And then the others, we'll ask you guys to be the recent mums. And sorry, one other person will ask you to take notes. So depending on how many people you have in your group, a couple of people asking the questions, a couple of people role playing as if you're the recent mums, and somebody taking the notes. And again, the question is, what changed for you after taking part in our program? And then digging into it and going around, and it's very conversational. This isn't a survey, this isn't a checklist. You're not standing there with a clipboard. You know, you would never be doing this in such a formal way with your user groups. This is conversation and understanding. So what changed for you after taking part? How does that make you feel? Why is that important? What difference does that make to you? You might iterate the question slightly differently just to keep the chat going and to start to understand what difference does it make. And then try to move on to the next one. Did anything else change? And in the anything else, how does that make you feel? Why is that important to you? What difference does that make for you? And again, conversation around it. And then on to who else do you think experienced any change? And what do you think has changed for them? And then do get into the unintended negative consequences. It can be uncomfortable, that one, but we do have to ask that. And I can't move my thing to see what's in that blue box underneath. Oh yeah. So after the role play, then you want to capture those key outcomes. And at that point, we're getting to fairly well-defined key outcomes because we're really understanding what's changed for our audience, what's changed for the person. So we're going to do that for about 20 minutes. Okay. Would anyone like to volunteer to fill us in on how far you got, how the process felt? Maybe tell us a little bit about what kind of outcomes you got to talk about.
Yeah, Seamus here.
Seamus, how are you?
Not too bad. Just an update on what was discussed. The participants were sort of emphasizing that the importance of networking and meeting other women and finding out that their experience wasn't unique. This sort of led to, you know, increased confidence, and as well, it sort of lessened the feelings of being overwhelmed, and that they were able to ask for support better as well, as a result of interacting with other women in the group.
Right.
There was a couple of points as well around, you know, people who may not have English as their first language, and some of the workshops enabled them to practice the activity as well as their language, and that helped them when they went back home with their children as well, and
right, yeah.
Increased confidence.
Yeah, wouldn't have thought of that. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, so the other one then, I suppose, that there was less stigma around mental health, that that this was a normal experience for most people,
yeah.
And you know that really helped with them, you know, their ability to deal with the issues. I suppose the last thing then, just around the unintended negative consequences.
Yeah.
There was a point made about, you know, it showed possible meeting and speaking with other families. It might have shown up, you know, the lack of support that you had in your own household, and that could maybe have implications for your relationship or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that was everything. Did I miss anything?
Yeah. I think that was all. Thanks, Seamus. That was great.
Great, yeah. Anyone from the other room have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I'm reporting back from the other room,
Great.
also from Donegal.
Very good.
So just in terms of the program itself, you know, we did feel that the feedback from the participants showed that we did achieve a lot of the aims that we considered. First of all, that people recovered well from any mental health issues that they had, or help them to deal with them. also that we were creating a culture where the parents were thriving in the community as well. So it turned out that the program was really important to all the participants, and the feedback was very, very positive from everyone. In terms of the outcomes, then we found that the social connections was a really important part. As Seamus was mentioning, that was really important. The networking, meeting new people, establishing new friendships to help people, support people through, you know, that stage of their life. Also, in terms of learning, people learned new skills. They learned how to deal with issues. They, you know, they had, you know, new things that they could do with the kids. That came up a couple of times. So then in terms of the personal outcomes, that personally the participants, it did improve their mental health. You know, that they, it helped to develop their, you know, to improve their relations at home. And it also had that positive impact on the children as well, that they were a bit more confident, came out of their shells and made new friends, just like the parents did as well. So there was a really positive, you know, flow of the program from beyond the parent that attended the program, that it was passing on to the rest of the relations. Then, you know, in terms of any sort of negative feedback or, you know, issues that maybe could be improved upon, and it felt that maybe to, you know, concentrate a little bit on the people who were suffering a bit more than others, so that a lot of people, you know, the mental health thing, they could deal with it with the support from the group, but some people needed a bit more attention, and that should be recognized, really. So, and then going forward, just to keep doing what you're doing, and and that it was just very positive all around.
It sounds as if you all got into your roles very well anyway. How did it feel as the question asker? Could you see yourself asking those questions of your participants? You know, and then what happened, and what difference did that make? How did that feel? Does that feel like something you could do, or would you be hesitant to do that with your own groups?
I took on the, sorry, Aideen, I took on the role play of asking the questions initially in our group. And I found that actually, especially with suggested and prompt questions, it was actually very easy. And I reflected after we'd done the exercise in the small group, actually we pulled out so much information there that probably more than you could have done with a form or a survey, and it felt more personal. So I think in a sort of peer reflection group like we were there, I think it has potential. I found it quite easy, and I saw the potential of it.
Great. Okay, well, that's good to hear. By the time you're working with people, these kind of conversations should be within the realm of what's, you know, a fairly ordinary conversation. But it's actually surprising how it does bring out new information, you know, when you start to extrapolate it into people's normal lives. And sometimes I think we just see the person, you know, when I did that transition year one, you know, I was saying sometimes if you ask people to draw their audience, draw a picture, you know, stick man, whatever. In that group, they drew a child in their school uniform. But the child is only in the school uniform for a few hours of the day. That's not the child. The child is the whole person. And what do they go home with out of it? And how does it affect their family? And how does it affect their life when they're hanging out with their friends on a Saturday night? And, you know, so you have to start to look at the person in a more round way. And I think those questions help that. So that's great. Good. More fun than in a questionnaire, Orla, I hear you. You may get to the point where there's some form of questionnaire to it, but certainly getting into this part is the real quality, rich stuff about what's really happening. And it sort of gives you a bit of a buzz that you're feeling this is, you know, this is why we do it. This is why we do it. Any thoughts from your organization's point of view in terms of looking at it, any insights or light bulb moments of going, okay, I really see the difference between an output and an outcome here, or I could see how that conversation would go with my groups?
Just, yeah, can I jump in? Yeah, thanks, Aideen.
Hi,
it's really insightful. I work with Green School, so I'm just trying to imagine how we would kind of set it up. So basically, we work with essentially remotely with nearly all the schools in Ireland on environmental improvements across different themes. So say I oversee the biodiversity theme, so I'd have kind of around 600 schools that I'd be responsible for every year or more every year. So we don't really, like we meet face to face, you know, say for the award ceremonies when we're handing over the green flag and that, but like there's no real opportunity. Like we get feedback in every other way, we get them to fill out forms and that kind of thing. But I wonder, would you, you know, do you suggest or do you recommend kind of creating a space specifically for these conversations to happen, or is that too, I don't know what the word is, but like you don't want it to be a forced conversation either. You don't want it to feel like you're just filling out a form and you're doing the writing, you know, you want it to be natural. So, you know, I'm just trying to think of how we'd bridge that gap and how we'd create an event or a format where it actually was a natural conversation. No, I hear you. And
I did this exactly, and it's not easy with teenagers coming in as a person they don't know at all. But you know, doing it with their, I presume you're doing it with transition years or older kids, or is it no? You're green schools. You're the younger kids.
It's all age ranges.
So they might be quite different outcomes for the younger ones versus the older ones as well. But it's the kind of thing that you can do. You don't have to do it with everybody all the time. This is really about getting the insights to say this is our most valuable, well-defined outcome. We now know what it's about. It might be different for second class versus fifth years, or, you know, you might have different versions. And then you start to get to the point where you go, okay, how can we capture this and get to some point of measuring it? But this point is about getting to understand what it is, what's that magic piece that we're doing. And yeah, a kind of a focus group type setup. Ideally with their teacher or with somebody who'll break the ice for you, that you're not going in as a new person if you don't know them. Smallish groups so that one or two people don't dominate. But yeah, it's making the time to sit down with people and get them talking. So yeah, it can feel a little contrived or when you're doing it at a distance and you don't have a personal relationship with it. But I suppose that's where you leverage the personal relationship that the teacher or whoever their front-facing person is.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Adrian.
Yeah. Anyone else on how you think of it might work actually doing it in your own organization? And this is the kind of thing we can talk about in the one-to-one. Sorry, Damien, you had your hand up there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out in this one. Like in our organization, rather than running programs, I mean our work it's advocacy work, so it's advocating for greater investment in cycling, changing legislation, changing policy. So the people we engage with most of all are senior officials, councillors, TDs. So it's a slightly different context than running a program with people who we're trying to support. So I find it slightly more difficult to figure out how to apply some of the thinking to the people who are in the greatest positions of power to change the structures. We can operate at trying to change structures rather than at an individual level. So I struggle a little bit sometimes to transpose the ideas to that advocacy context.
So an outcome for you is a change in policy that will improve the environment in which we all cycle.
Yeah, I mean, so rather than, you know, walking and cycling, getting the crumbs at the table when it comes to capital investment that actually gets maybe 20%. Now we achieved that one in the last year, but you know, high level policy shifts is what we're legislative changes so that the bicycle isn't treated as the pariah on the road. So there are those structural changes we seek to create. Yeah,
but is the compelling story about the outcomes more about the individuals who will ultimately benefit from this, the cyclists? Like, it's outcomes for the cyclist is your ultimate aim.
Yeah, well, it's people who currently are too frightened to be on the road, particularly women, children, older people, and they're the ultimate people who benefit. You know, rather than thinking of the existing cyclists, there are people who currently don't exist. So there's kind of a long causal chain between the efforts we put in, the activities we do, and the impacts, which are 5 years down the road,
Yeah.
actually having high quality segregated facilities, seeing the children cycling to school, seeing so that for us it's a kind of long-term it's a long-term context. So yeah.
Well, we can definitely talk about this in the one-to-one, but I think it's going to be related to other people's situations where the outcome can be a long time coming. So I'm thinking of, is Orla there? Orla, sorry, I hope you don't mind if I talk about you. You know, helping refugees getting their refugee status or things like that. You're a long time dealing with supporting people. You could be years supporting people before you get to that. Thank you so much. Finally, we've done this and you know, we've got this result. But in the meantime, there are beneficial outcomes that are being got from the intervention because I have somebody supporting me on the journey. I'm not alone doing this. And, you know, there's loads of interim outcomes that you're helping create even before you get to the big cherry on top outcome. And I suppose maybe putting some flesh on what those interim ones are. So that it's not like, well, you know, it's 20 years before we see the benefit of what we're doing. So can we name those interim steps along the way that show that we're progressing towards it? But yeah, that's one to think about. Damien, I think we might have to hash that one out a little bit more. I'm conscious of the time here, and I just wanted to move on a little bit, if I may, to briefly talking about taking this to the next step. Now, this will be done in the interim workshop if you want to do that. But now that we know what those really, really important outcomes are, we can do qualitative interviews that will get some kind of a result about their experience about those. We can have this narrative that will inform how we run our organization and use qualitative interviews. We can also move towards quantitative methods, and this will be covered in the next one. So that's where you are looking at, you know, 600 schools, thousands and thousands of kids. Could we get a survey? So on a scale of 1 to 5, this outcome, this outcome, this outcome, can we say we've made progress on these outcomes? But now we know what outcomes we're measuring. We now know what the really important ones are. And we can start to look at the relative importance of different ones, and are ones contributing more than others. So that's when you get into things like SurveyMonkey or Mentimeter, and we won't go into those today. But I do want to really reiterate the proportionate thing about this. You know, there isn't an expectation that everybody is SurveyMonkeying everybody constantly. We don't want to wear everybody out. They can get, somebody said it in the chat there, you know, people are surveyed a lot, so we can't be doing it constantly. And so it is based on what capacity you have, what's a reasonable sample size to get a finding that we can stand over, what stage are we at as an organization. So we're not imposing some massive task upon you. But we're saying, if you're looking at doing these things, explore it in the context of what are the big outcomes, those well-defined outcomes that are really important to the beneficiaries. That's the starting point, that's the jumping off point. I want to talk a little bit about case studies. I think quite a few people do case studies, and I just wanted to touch on this just because I came across some, I actually ran a program for people about writing case studies. And case studies can be kind of tough going. And depending on the purpose of them, sometimes you have to write them for funders or whatever, you might have to write them for some reason. But I suppose this one is a bit about, you know, the ingredients and what we did and how we made it and who we involved and all the partners and how many workshops. That's a long story of a lot of detail. And I want to ask you to consider flipping that to a different way of telling it. So the example I want to use is from some work we did with there were UN program refugees who came to Carlow many, many years ago, and a huge program was put in place to support them in that move. And I suppose this is kind of telling at the moment with other groups arriving. And we tried to flip the narrative on that story. Rather than being about all the work that went in to get into this point where we had this program ready for them, we flipped it and we told the story with permission, obviously, because you need somebody who's going to be on board with this, about a boy who grew up in Cox's Bazar, which is an enormous refugee camp in Bangladesh. And he basically spent his childhood there. He was there years with his family. And he would see the helicopters come and go with the staff or with equipment or medical or whatever it was bringing. And he would see these helicopters for years and years and years. And he said, someday I'm going to be on one of those helicopters. And then, you know, we tell the story of the program and all the things that were put in place and whatever. And we tell the story about this boy who's now living in Carlow. He's actually in Carlow IT. He's studying aeronautical engineering. And it flipped the story, totally flipped the story. Now I'm interested. Now I know, why are we doing all this stuff? We're doing it for that boy who's now 19 and studying aeronautical engineering in Carlow IT, which is a long way from Cox's Bazar. So if you are going the case study route, try to tell the story from the participant's point of view and show their journey. And literally the journey, you started here, you ended up there. And every good story needs a protagonist, somebody that we're going to care about, somebody with a story they're willing to share and that has a backstory that says that's why they're in that program, they match up to what we're doing. So you need a protagonist, you need a plot. So our program that we delivered moved that story along. And then you need a resolution. And this is just storytelling. You need a protagonist, you need a plot, and a resolution. Now I know that's simplistic. There isn't necessarily a happy ending. You know, everything doesn't get tied up in a bow. And often it's the beginning of a new story, but there's some resolution, that there's some achievement within the story. So I'd really encourage you, if you are, somebody said, you know, don't tell me how you made the sausage. You know, nobody cares about how you made the sausage, it's the sizzle that people care about. So if you can flip it, you can still tell the story of how you made the sausage, because the case study needs to show that, you know, we did this and we involved these partners and we brought in this expertise and all that. But if you can tell the story from the participant's point of view, that will make it a much more compelling story, and people kind of get it. Why are we doing this? So that's my little story about helicopters.
Aideen?
Yep. Can't see who that
it's Orla here in Orla Neely.
Go ahead there, Orla.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm trying to formulate. I shouldn't have pressed to talk before I formulate what I'm trying to say. I think we do some narrative and case studies, because otherwise we're hearing 25 Rohingya came to Carlow, or, you know, we're hearing numbers. So you try and personalize some stories. That's what I do at my board. I would tell snippets of things that we had worked on, whether it was where things were pivotal, maybe change somebody's life. It's not going to be a film. It's a tale of how we engaged with somebody, and by them working hard and us working hard, something pivotal happened, which is a real privilege to happen in any work you do. And not all stories have a happy ending.
No, exactly.
And that has to be told too, because it's the color and texture of what we're doing sometimes rather than the outcomes. Am I going too far with this? It's just some of this I see it around me all the time, that people are throwing out facts and throwing out this, and sometimes it also others the people that we're working with. Now, I know they're in a different circumstance, but it can other people too much, so that they are even looked at as other and needing sympathy and support, rather than something you need to dig out for this bit of time. That's what's happening in your life, which would be the same for any of us in those circumstances. I'm probably overstating it. I just...
No, I think there's and I remember this came up in this storytelling workshop as well, is that we have to be so careful not to be exploitative of telling other people's sad tales, or of being exploitative, saying, aren't we the heroes that we came in and rescued the situation? So there is a very delicate balance of that, and it's about, I suppose, finding somebody who's willing to share their story and have it told in a very human way that other humans relate to, and who don't see it as that doesn't stratify us in the story. But yeah, it is, I know what you're saying, it is tricky, and it's not all happily ever after. And I suppose telling that is all the more reason for why we all keep doing what we're doing. You know, for all the ones that didn't have a happily ever after, we all worked just as hard and we'll keep working because it doesn't work out for everyone. So I don't have a simple answer, but it is about choosing very carefully whose story you tell and how you tell it, that we don't stratify, as you say, and separate us. Anyone else on that?
Can I just say, Aideen, about your target audience for these case studies?
Exactly,
That,
it depends.
you know,
on
we have a community side, but we also have a very strict scientific side. To say people want to know how, they do genuinely want to know how we did it. So a case study might be A and B.
Yeah.
You know, A might be the community, it might be the beneficiary on the ground, but then the B is the how we actually did it. So
yeah. No, and I suppose, yeah, it's all about who are you writing it for and why you're writing, what do you need to convince them of. But I think even with the sort of because this came up as well about, you know, we're just sending it into the department. It's like whoever's in the department is still a human. You still have to, you know, get them a little bit on the heartstrings. This is why we're doing it, to some person who's some anonymous, you know, bureaucrat or whoever it might be. So we're all still human. So to tell that human story, I think, makes a more compelling argument for us. But yeah, you're right. It mightn't be appropriate for some people need to know how you made the sausage, you know, in all its gory detail. How are we doing here? We were going to do a quick poll, Maya, if you're up for that. And this is just to try to get a handle on, so sorry, the one-to-one meetings are where we can dig into this a little bit more. So yourself and myself talking through maybe what you think the outcomes might be, how you might go about fleshing them out, how you might take the next step. So we have a poll there coming up where you can throw in what kind of things you think might be useful to talk about next week. If there's something that isn't on there that you want to include, if you can get to the chat session, let me stop sharing there. You'll be able to pull up the chat if there's something that isn't on the list there, but you think is something that would be useful. That would be great. You don't have to, we're not going to hold it. Oh, somebody wants everything. There's Jessica saying funders and philanthropists, a mix of A and B, recognizing the social value and not just the numbers. Exactly. So if you have a think about that for a minute. And some people are putting things in the chat there. And Maya, will you be able to save this poll that we can have a look at it?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. If you're unsure, we can just sort of have an open-ended conversation next week and see where you want to take it. And what's proportionate for your organization.
Our experience years ago was that we work with asylum seekers, refugees and all immigrants locally, and often with funding streams we would pencil in or budgeted in evaluation, and then you'd engage the evaluator from the very beginning of the project. So you had some sort of thing that you'd remember along the way rather than at the end, and that's certainly not available to us at the moment at all. I mean, we're capable of doing it ourselves. It's time and embedding it in so it's not a whole other chore. For some of the quantitative stuff, that's need to find a way of doing that.
And also I think sometimes with getting funding from different funders, they come along and ask you to do things a certain way, and marrying what you know are the ones that you want to, that, you know, you're saying, well, these are our well-defined outcomes, and you want to try to get those into this method, whatever methodology they might come along and use. But if you have your well-defined outcomes already, then you get to set the terms a little bit more because you know what's most important. There's a few things there in the chat. Outcomes for organizations working in the advocacy space. That's Damien, great. And easy treasy, invoke some magic. The easiest ways to capture this sizzle is we're only on our 170,000th tree in our million tree target. Good stuff. Great, so I think, is that everyone who wanted to? To look at it? Anyone else there add in as we're going along? Fiorella, did you want to talk a little bit about the logistics of the one-to-ones or anything?
Yeah, sure. Basically, we share with you all the link. You can basically book your slot in the Doodle poll we share with you. So it's a 20-minute session with Aideen. So feel free to just book your slot there. Once you book your slot, we will send a calendar invite and the link to join the Zoom meeting with Aideen.
Great, so that would be great. I think it's Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. So if there's a time slot in there that we can arrange to talk, we can get into some of the nitty gritty really beyond today. We kept it fairly generic today, so that we can get the concept of that, shifting it to those well-defined outcomes for our users and how to find out what those are. I was glad to hear that people found that a comfortable conversation, that it didn't feel too strange. I know it might have to be adapted to different people's situations, or finding those sort of interim outcomes that you might talk about rather than the big long-term one. But I think having those conversations will be really rich. They also, I find, it feels good. You know, you start to feel the benefits that you might not have thought about, or that you might have thought about but you were never really sure are really happening. So I just find those conversations can be really valuable, and to share them then with your volunteers, share them with your board. You know, this is the why, and sometimes I think we all get so bogged down in the how, and the how hard it is, and how it's a constant battle for funding, or it's this or it's that, that you can sometimes just get so bogged down in keeping the show on the road that it's a nice reminder sometimes to get that why. And again, it's not straightforward, it's not magic, it doesn't work out happily ever after for everybody, but that's why we all keep battling on. Amy or Fiorella, did you guys have anything else you wanted to add? We are coming up.
Thank you. Thanks, Aideen. Really accessible, really, really useful. And thank you all for your time today. We really appreciate you giving us your time. And I guess just to encourage you to mine Aideen's mind on those one-to-one sessions. So do please book. But look, that's just thanks from all of us at Rethink Ireland, and we will see you soon.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.